Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest Lee Baucom. Lee is a PhD and the creator of the Save the Marriage system used around the world for over 2 decades. He is the author of 4 books on relationship issues and marriage recovery. And as a relationship coach, Lee works with people around the world to save and restore their intimate relationships, even when a partner has given up. His method proved useful for people working on their own to turn their marriages and committed relationships around into loving, thriving, connected relationships. He shares that approach in his system, his writing, and his Save the Marriage podcast. He's been podcasting since 2013. He is married with 2 adult children and 2 active dogs. And Lee, if any of your active dogs want to join the YouTube version of the podcast, are more than welcome to. And I would suspect they might have some better questions for me, for you, than I might have for you. So in any event, welcome to the podcast. I've been looking forward to speaking with you for some time now.
Yeah, Dave, I'm excited to be here. And Clementine is sleeping right beside me, so I don't know that she'll make an entrance. She likes to nap.
Well, if she wants to make an entrance, this is her
We'll let her.
platform as well, too. Absolutely. This is her platform. So, how we met, it's just like one of those interesting kind of niches in the podcast world. And I've done this before where I've sent out cold podcast pitches to other podcasters. And, Lee, being a podcaster yourself, some of the pitches are and some are really good. And yours was really good. And I reached out. Thankfully, you responded. I think we had a wonderful pre-chat, and here we are.
Yeah, and I thought it was a great connection, so I'm excited to be talking about this.
Yeah, me too. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about is your Save the Marriage system. Talk about how that evolved, what inspired it both personally and professionally.
So I was trained as a therapist, as you mentioned. I was PhD level therapist and had been in practice for a number of years, even as I was completing the 2 masters and a PhD. And I was getting disenchanted the further I got into that because I was specializing in marriage and family therapy. And marriage therapy, let's say, doesn't have a great track record and success rates. That was getting to be frustrating to me because I really wanted to be able to help the people coming into my office. And so I began to look at what else could I use? What other approaches were there? And what other approaches could I develop along the way? I was working on my dissertation and read an article this was back in the mid 90s. So I read an article about this new profession of life coaching. And I turned to my wife after she'd spent all this time watching me go through all of the schooling. And I said, this is kind of how I work. I was already kind of switching to that mode. And she said, okay, what are you going to be doing? Because you're at the end of this dissertation. I finished the dissertation, finished the PhD, stayed in practice, but I did also another 3 years training in coaching to kind of differentiate that out. And one of the things that I've always believed is you can complain about something for a long time, but at some point you have to say, but this is what I believe. You can't just keep complaining. That was true when I was doing my thesis and my dissertation. I was throwing rocks at some pretty big things, and then I needed to say, this is what I thought. So that's what I did in those pieces. So I began to write about what really does make a difference for marriages. Originally, I thought, well, this will be something that people who are married will want to read to improve their relationship. And maybe if they're not even married yet, they can head off the problems. And then I realized that what I was writing about was the same thing that helped people to save their marriage. And so that began to be what I stretched into, and kept adding pieces along over the years. And so that is the Save the Marriage system. It's designed to help go after not the symptoms of the problem, which is, I think, one of the deficits of therapy, but actually the underlying issue that drives most marital problems. I say most because there is another category, but most marital issues are driven by this factor.
What is that specific factor that you've seen that makes or breaks marriages?
It's disconnection. And the disconnection that happens in lots of marriages, if not the majority of marriages, I call it the pause button. So this is how we get here. So you meet somebody, you're interested in them, you spend your time connecting and building the connection and building the relationship to the point when you say, you know what, this is the person for me for the rest of my life. We're going to do this. And you have a fairly short ceremony for such a big change in life and go off to go figure it out. And I always say it's kind of like having on the job training with no supervision, right? Just the two of you trying to figure this out, nobody correcting you. And so you start building in bad habits. And this is one of those habits. So you go from connection to hitting the pause button, thinking we've got this relationship down. So we've got it solid. Let's pause this for right now so that we can do the parenting thing, the career thing, the hobbies, the interests, the travels, the aging parents, whatever it is, something that you haven't been able to focus on before because you were putting your energy into building the relationship. Now you say, now's the time to do that. And the problem is when you hit the pause button, you don't notice the effect of that because you have that connection. You have the momentum of that connection until it starts to drop off and you're not feeding that connection, right? So you hit the pause and you start disconnecting. And the disconnection is what eats away at the relationship.
Yeah, it makes sense because I think when you get married, you fall madly in love, whether it's chemical attraction and then a philosophical attraction. Once you get to know each other, you're focused on each other, and then it becomes a job. When you have kids, the kids get older, you have to get them to preschool, you have to get them to baseball games, and it becomes, and I think you can lose that connection with each other because you're caught up in the day to day. I've said this on other podcasts. Marrying the love of your life doesn't prepare you for marriage. And marrying the love of your life doesn't prepare you to be a good parent because it's different when you're bringing your respective histories and habits into a relationship. It's a lot different when you're living with each other and then you're getting into raising a family and in terms of dealing with all of that.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's like on the job training. And I think for me, I like proactive approaches where I think there should be a parenting skills class or classes for anybody who's thinking of getting into a marriage, a couples coaching session or a couple coaching sessions to prepare individuals at least for what to expect and some of the pitfalls and more of a proactive approach, which I think your system tends to really, really advocate for.
So here's the interesting thing about this. I did a lot of research on this too because I was doing this. Premarital counseling, coaching, whatever you call that, doesn't make a substantial difference in outcomes. That was one of the disappointments. And one of the things I did, because I think that is an important thing to do. And I'll tell you why I think it's an important thing to do, even though I don't think it does what we want it to do. So my office was in an area that had a number of large places of worship, lots of weddings, and the ministers just frankly didn't want to be doing all of the premarital counseling, but they wanted to be responsible with what they were doing. So they turned it over to me, which meant that I saw a large number of people before they got married coming through my office each year. And so if I were to ask the general population, like, what are the chances of a marriage surviving or ending in divorce, they would say it's about 50-50. And it's in the ballpark. It's not exact, but it's in the ballpark. And so I often have this conversation with couples, like, here you are, you've decided you're going to get married. Y'all got the date, you've got everything. So why is it that you believe that you have beat the odds? Because if you didn't think you would beat the odds, you wouldn't be doing this. Like, you've already got this under control. Why is that? And to a couple, they would say to me, because we have the real love. They believed that they had some difference in the love they had with each other than the people who didn't make it. Now, I'd been in the field long enough to know that wasn't at all the case, that everybody thought that they had their real love, otherwise they wouldn't be doing this. And so what that tells me is that they were often a bit immune to feedback. They had already pronounced themselves ready for this, and I was just the hurdle to get through, which meant that I also saw as one of my tasks to pick a fight between them to prove that they didn't have everything nailed down. So I was asking questions to stir the pot a little bit.
Mhm.
It wasn't hard to do because they didn't have it all nailed down, and I didn't expect them to. And so I was there to help facilitate the conversation. But what I wanted to get out of that, knowing the statistics, that it really doesn't make a difference, statistically significant difference between people who don't have those sessions and people who do, people who don't have a weekend or people who do, those things don't do it because they're immune to feedback at that point. But what I wanted them to do is have a face. Like when they had problems, they didn't wait until the problems were so deep that they actually had somebody that they had a connection with, that they could come in. And so I would often say, you know what, come back, 10,000 mile, 1 year little checkup. Let's just do that and see where things are. Some took me up on it, many didn't, but many took me up on the offer of, if they hit a problem, to come in sooner, not later. And so the intervention was actually to have somebody to connect with and come in at an earlier stage in the crisis, when it's easier to solve, before all the resentments built up, before all of the frustrations are built up, before all the disdain poisons the system. And so that was the effectiveness of it, not in preparing. I think that if we were to do something worthwhile in our country, we would have to look at how you talk to people who are seriously dating, not committed, because at that point, they've already stepped into the trap.
I like that approach in terms of presenting some options, planting some seeds, and say, you have me as a resource if you need it down the road. If things start going south, or you start putting the pause button on your marriage or losing your sense of connection, come find me, and then we can talk. And you're right. In thinking of this, it's like they're not ready for feedback at that point.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and so let's go back to that pause button, because they didn't see that it was a problem.
mhm.
And if people are listening at a point where they haven't hit a problem yet, you wouldn't think that that's a problem to say, I need to devote this energy over here. That doesn't sound like a threat. And the problem is, relationships cannot be paused. There is no suspended animation for a relationship. It's either growing and expanding, or it's shrinking and dying. And when you hit the pause button, it is not growing and expanding. You're saying, we will get back to us at some point. And that's where the damage starts to accumulate, because the "we'll get back to us" is always at some point in the future. There's an intention to do that in the future. And many couples keep pushing it out, keep pushing it out, keep pushing it out until the damage is done. And the reason it's so damaging is because we humans are deeply connecting creatures, probably the most connecting creatures, where I mentioned Clementine, she understands physical connection. Like, I give her a rub, a scratch, and she's like, okay, you love me, and I'm going to be up against you because I love you. That's her level. Humans have another 2 layers of that, because we can talk to each other about things, have verbal skills. We can think back on what happened last week, last year in very specific ways. And so all of that connection begins to be disconnections after the pause button. And the disconnection, because we humans are so connecting, ends up being very painful for people. And the pain, we're all most aware of the pain we're experiencing, not the pain we're creating, right? And so it's easy to say, why isn't my spouse giving me the attention I need? And the spouse on the other side going, why isn't my spouse giving me the attention I need? And neither one seeing how they're a part of the process.
Makes sense. So what steps do you take to get individuals to take the pause button off their relationship? And I'm sensing that the 3 levels of connection that you've talked about and you've developed are intertwined. Am I right in assuming that?
That is correct. So let me back up. And when I'm having a conversation with a couple, I'm asking, what is created when both of you have hit the pause button? Because I want them both to see that that is a mutual instance.
Mhm.
There are It's not that one person pauses it, the other continues to connect. That just doesn't happen. There are a couple of ways it can happen. One is kind of a mutually decided one, like we need to now parent, we need to now get our careers at this point. The other is more of a reflective one, like, oh, you want to put your energy over there. Okay, I'll let you do that, because they don't see that it's damaging until the damage is setting in. How has our pause created our problems is a useful conversation, instead of how your pause affected me. It's how our pause has created something. So back to the levels of connection, though. Yeah, there are three. And by the way, just to say, these are three ways that we connect with everyone in our lives. It's just the depth of that that's available in a marriage is different than anywhere else, which is why it is even more painful. If I don't have a close conversation with a friend of mine, that's not going to be as damaging as if I don't have a close conversation with my spouse who is supposed to be here. So I've already mentioned the physical connection. That's loving touch. It's a very easy to understand, except for when I say it, people often say, oh, you mean sex? And my response is, well, no, but yes. I mean, that is one version of that, but there are lots of others. Hand holding, hugging, kissing, patting, caressing. Anytime there is loving touch, we're there. That's physical connection. Same thing we do with our kids, hugging our kids. I'm a love language for me is touch. I hug my friends. We were visiting some friends over the weekend, and his hand went out, and my arms were already around this guy. And I was like, oh, okay. And he gives me a hug. That's just physical connection, right? So that's what we share with warm-blooded creatures. Then there is emotional connection. An emotional connection is, let's say physical connection, nonverbal. I can talk about hugging, doesn't do anything. You got to hug, right? Nonverbal. Emotional connection is verbal and nonverbal. As you're agreeing with me, you're nodding your head and like, oh, keep going on that. And you get what I'm saying, right? Same with my wife and I. Like when our kids would do something, we would often give each other that kind of knowing look to each other. And you don't have to say anything to know, okay, we get each other on this. We both are going, what's up with this, right? So there's the nonverbal. And then there's the verbal. And there are really two messages embedded in emotional connection. I get you, you get me. I support you, you support me. The getting and supporting are two different levels where we feel like somebody just understands us and supports us. And those are that verbal and nonverbal. When we talk about how tough a day is, that's verbal connection. When we talk about how great a day was, that's verbal connection as we respond to each other. So that's the emotional connection. Then there is the spiritual connection, and many people have thought that's the same thing, and it's not. And so let me see if I can prove that. So spiritual connection, when I say that, people are like, oh, you mean religion? And my response is, well, no, but I mean, yes, in the sense that our religious life reflects our values, and our values is part of what lives in that spiritual existence of ours. But so do our hopes and dreams, so do our fears, so do our kind of what has created us. So those couples that I talked about, they would come in and tell me how they got together. And I was always interested in this conversation they would tell me about. They saw this person, they were attracted to them. And they were interested enough that they wanted to create more of an emotional connection with them. So they build up this attraction, connection, physical and emotional. And then they have this talk where they talk about the families they came from, what they want to do in life, what their values are, what their hopes and dreams are, the fears, all of that. And they would often say, and that's when I knew I loved them. That was the conversation that turned it. Right? That's a spiritual connection because they're sharing something that we don't share with many people at that depth, at the depth of that conversation. I remember it in my, at that time, girlfriend and my having the conversation about the family we came from, the values, all of those pieces, and going, wow, this person is important to me, important enough that I would share that, and important enough that I treasure what she says, right? That's that connection. And the interesting thing is people forget how important that conversation is. And so they have it once, twice, maybe three times, and then they pack that away as if our hopes and dreams don't change over the years, as if the levels of our values of what they mean to us might not change over the years. And so we lose track of each other in that. So that's often the first one that disappears, and people don't even recognize that that's gone. Emotional connection disappears when couples start reporting to each other. Like, how was your day? Oh, I had a meeting, I had to get a report in, and I did this. That's not how their day was. That's a report of their day. But emotional connection happens on the rapport. How do you build rapport with each other? How was your day? I had a meeting, it was really tough, or it went really well. That's more revealing of what's going on inside, right? So that's a rapporting, and rather than just reporting. Physical connection often falls away. There's just, touched out or too little energy. So I've had people who are like, you expect me to stay in physical connection with my spouse. I'm at the end of the day, I'm so tired. I'm like, how hard is it to like sit on the couch right up against your spouse or give them a hug when you're coming in the door? You're acting like it's a drain to you rather than a gain. And when we connect with somebody, it's actually a gain. We just have it framed in our mind that it's a drain because now we're in the habits of disconnecting. And so as that happens, that begins to create the frustrations, the resentments, the disdain that grows out of that.
Yeah, I mean, you can never be too tired to hold your spouse's hands, or like you said, just rub up against them, put your arm around them, hold them. We all need physical connection, regardless of how long we've been married, regardless of how tired we are. We need that.
Yeah. And we all need those three levels. So here's what I like about being able to name those three levels. I've just given people a way of diagnosing where the connection is. If you're still connecting physically and emotionally and spiritually with your spouse, good, keep doing it. If you realize that that's missing, then we have now diagnosed the disconnection. But it also gives a treatment plan. And it's not often you get a diagnosis and a treatment plan from the same category. Like if you're disconnected emotionally, spiritually, and physically, I've just given you 3 targets of places you can begin to work on rebuilding that.
I'm glad you emphasize the spirituality piece, because in order to do holistic training, we have to really explore an individual's or a couple's spiritual needs, and explore those to the extent that they are motivated to explore those. And sometimes that may get not as emphasized as much as the physical, psychological, or the emotional components, but that is just as important. This just occurred to me as far as I know you deal with couples who have experienced traumas in their relationships, whether it's death or other transitions. Does that, does your approach in terms of establishing connection, does that differ? Does that take on a new layer?
Yeah. So back to that emotional connection of feeling like you support each other. Those are opportunities for doing that, of turning toward each other in those tough moments, of death of a child, for instance. There's a high correlation between the death or a sickness of a child and a failure in a marriage. And the reason is because they disconnect around that. They don't support each other through that. And so as they disconnect, they're doing their own grief world, and they're pulling their worlds further and further apart. So how do we turn towards each other? So I have another piece of my watching successful marriages, and that is that they create what I call being a we. Like, we are in this together. We are a team. And when I say that many times, people are like, okay, you're talking about just becoming this kind of a mass conglomerate together. I'm not. I use the analogy more like a team, where in order to have a strong team, you need strong players, individual players, like bringing their best to the game. And so seeing it as a team, though, so back to your thing, if you're seeing these difficult times as how do we deal with this as a team? That is a very different approach than how do you deal with whatever that is going on in your life, and how do I deal with whatever's going on in my life, and we'll just process it separately. It's how do we do that so that we move our relationship forward. One of the things that I watch couples do when they have a team approach is when they approach conflict, they use conflict to better their relationship. I don't expect people to have a non-conflict relationship. That's not realistic. In fact, when it is non-conflict, it's often representing a disconnection. Like we're so disconnected that we don't have any points of disagreement. But can you see conflict as being a way of improving the relationship? Like we're working to use our different viewpoints to get to a better place for us, for the team. And that's true whether it's conflict or these traumatic moments of coming together and saying, we're in this together.
Yeah. And I think conflict is really, if it's handled in a very healthy way, in a productive manner, seen as an opportunity for growth, it is healthy, because we can listen to both sides of an individual's feelings or thoughts about a particular issue and find out this is where we align, this is where we don't align, and we can come together. It's kind of like consensus, where we can live with the decision, but we're living with the decision is based on both of our needs being addressed and being met in a way that satisfies both parties. So, yeah, I agree. I think conflict is healthy. And you're right. If we don't have conflict, there is a serious disconnect if we're just.
There's another problem. It's a symptom. So too much conflict, too little conflict, both end up being symptomatic of problems. One of the things I often talk to people about is what I call the third option, because if two people with two different opinions they often can get stuck in the who's right, this way or this way. The third option is what's the best option that serves us both? It could be that it's one of theirs when you look at it from what serves our relationship the best. It may be one of those, but it may be a more creative third option of, oh, we hadn't thought about that. But now that when we think about where we need to go as a team, we look for that third option. I mean, I didn't come up with that. That is what negotiations are about. That's what mediation is centered on. What is your third option for this? It's just a point to the fact that if you're looking for third options, you're working as a team. You're not oppositional to each other.
Yeah, and you're looking to find a resolution that's going to be not maybe what you both parties intended, but again, it's something you can live with. It's something you can agree with because both parties have had an opportunity to work together on the solution. So, and yeah, I think it's the same in marriage as well too. You work together. The outcomes are a heck of a lot better relationship-wise and with the practical things that we need to deal with in a marriage as well too.
Yeah.
The Unpause app, that intrigued me in and of itself, that there could be an app for unpausing a marriage.
Yeah. So if you hit the pause button, how we get back to any health is by unpausing the relationship. And the problem is that people get into the habits of being disconnected. So they might eventually go, wow, we are so disconnected. I don't know how. Now they know because they hit the pause button and they've continued on and built up the resentments and frustrations. So I created an app to do a number of things. One is it's got a twice daily exercise to help people think about how they want to interact, who they want to be. And that's creating habits of change. So you can figure out how you want to be that day and then look at how you did, right? So morning and evening. And then there's some trainings in there and some assessments and some ways for people to understand more about how to unpause it, including a built-in database of my own knowledge base. So how I work, you can ask it questions and it can give you some feedback on that. But what's really helpful about an app as opposed to, say, a book sitting on the counter is an app will send you reminders because you're trying to change habits. And if you're in the habit of being disconnected, you need to create new habits of connecting. And so the app has reminders that pop up for you. Can you ignore them? Sure. We all ignore reminders on our phone all the time. But if you're actually trying to change the pattern, those reminders can be a callback to here is what you're working on. It works both on an Android and an iPhone, so pretty much covers the smartphone world to send you the information that you interact on that app. And so what we're talking about is unpausing your marriage. So not surprisingly, you can find that at unpauseyourmarriage.com because that's what we're trying to do.
I like it. And in this world of technology with our reliance on smartphones and apps, that's a perfect way to do that. What are a couple of typical reminders that individuals will want to be prompted with, or couples want to be prompted with?
So the prompts are built in based on what the training is and also those daily exercises. And then you can ask it to prompt you on things. Like I teach some ways of doing some non-chasing interactions. And so you can have that prompt you on that. Those are just specific ways of phrasing things. Because one of the things that people often get into when they feel the disconnection is they start chasing their spouse.
Yes.
I call it the chaser spacer dynamic. So the more you chase them, the faster they'll space away, or you can be the pacer. And that's where you find the way that you can interact in a way that's acceptable, like in a way that it doesn't feel like you're forcing them to do something, that you're actually inviting connection. So back to Clementine, sometimes I've let her in the backyard and I need her to come back in. And so what do? I make the mistake of moving towards her. And what does she do? She runs. And the faster I chase her, the more she runs. That's built in for her as a game, as a fun game. So I can use another approach with Clementine, which is to entice her to come to me. Maybe it's a treat, maybe it's an opportunity for a scratch, but I entice her to come closer to me. She still has to choose to do that. So I'm inviting that connection. And that's the approach that I work with for people who are working on this, particularly alone, that they work to be invitational on the connection rather than heavy-handed with the connection.
Yeah, it makes sense. Does history also, Lee, have something to do with it in terms of what a partner brings from their family of origin or generational trauma? I'm thinking people that don't like to be chased, if they're starting to run away and their partner is chasing, I'm thinking in terms of let's say, for example, abuse dynamics. If they were physically abused, that chase or that person approaching them could be a trigger, or they could be re-experiencing whatever abuse that occurred in their family of origin, or perhaps in a previous relationship where there was domestic violence.
Yeah, the fact is that whenever we enter into a relationship, we bring all of our past with us and all those experiences. And some of us have more trauma than others. And so, yes, that is possible for the reconnecting to be threatening. Generally, couples are trying to figure out how to reconnect, not actually to connect, because they got into the relationship because they found connection. And so they're trying to find reconnection that is healthy, that is helpful. And so one of the things, if you go with that team approach, one of the questions is how you frame it as we both together have to deal with the histories that we both have. That's the team approach, right? I know that you're going to have your scars, I'm going to have my scars, and how do we work on that as a team rather than saying, that's your problem, you deal with it. Now, that doesn't mean that the person who's experiencing that doesn't go do their own therapy and do their own growth, but to even see that as this is us as a team coming together around this, instead of what is often used as the blame that this is your fault. And it really is this is our opportunity to move through this, our growth point as a couple to understand each other and what we bring in that often doesn't fully emerge until we're in a relationship, and that relationship is actually testing our relationship dynamics from all along. Lots of couples, though, come in with at least some knowledge that there is some history to that. And then the question is, do we treat that through the connection and the team approach, or do we let that pull at us and pull us apart? Which means that we're allowing the trauma to re-traumatize.
Absolutely. And I know when my wife first met and we made a commitment, we brought our past histories of relationships and other trauma into our world. We just talked about it and we just decided what baggage are we going to work on together? What baggage could we leave at the door? And it really, I think, heightened our sense of connection early in the relationship because we were able to talk about that and bring our past and make them a part of our present and use that as a point of connection to further our relationship. I like the we're in it together approach. It's better than we're in it separately approach, that's for sure. So, your podcast, and I've seen your YouTube channel, you're busy. You have a very active YouTube channel with your podcast. So tell us about the Save the Marriage podcast, how that aligns with the work that you do with couples. And if I were to listen to your podcast, what would I take away from it?
Yeah, so we're at 600. I just recorded today the 601st episode. So It's been going a while. That's once a week that it's come out, and very consistently for 13 years or so. And I actually tried this years ago before that, before podcasting was a podcasting thing, and it was too much trouble. And then suddenly 13 years ago, I went, wait, that thing I was trying to do years before, there's a way to do it because one of my kind of goals or tasks of life is to help people have maps to follow on how to get to better places. And so I've written books to do that. I've created programs to do that. I've podcasted to do that because I want people to understand exactly what we're looking at and some of the subtleties of it. So today's podcast I recorded, I was answering a basic question I get. I'm the save the marriage guy, right? And so some people are like, so you think every marriage can be saved? So I answer that. That's actually not what I believe at all, but that there's some nuance to that. And there's some importance to what we do about that. And so I try to point people in a direction to help them have some understanding, some mindset, some skills, some capacity of moving forward. So to answer that question, I don't think every marriage can be saved, but I think there's only one way to figure that out, and that is to take action. I've had over the years a number of people who would say, I will, you know, pay you whatever it takes if you can guarantee me that I can save my marriage. And my response is, I can't guarantee you can save your marriage, but I can pretty much guarantee what happens if you don't take action.
Yeah.
If you're talking to me, you're not talking to me because your marriage is going well. You're talking to me because there's a crisis, and that crisis will expand if you don't take action. So there's only one way to figure out, can a marriage be saved or not? And that is to take action, but you got to know what action to take. You need a roadmap, and most people don't have that roadmap. So the podcast, the books, the programs are all designed to give people a roadmap on how to either build a marriage or rebuild a marriage.
Yeah, it sounds like everything that you do, your writing, your podcast, your therapy work, coaching is all in alignment. It's very seamless. Now, before we recorded, I was reading a part of your bio, and he said as a relationship coach, you work with people around the world to save and restore their intimate relationships, even when a partner is given up. Now, traditionally, what I've been taught about marriage counseling is it takes two to do marriage counseling or couples counseling, that you can't do couples counseling with one willing partner and one unwilling partner. I know you believe otherwise, so educate us educate us on how that can happen.
So I warned you there was a pivot.
Mhm.
Here's the pivot. This is one of the reasons I left therapy, because that is a basic tenet of marriage counseling, that in order to do marriage counseling, you have to have two people there to work on the problem between them, which also is part of what bogs down the process in marriage therapy. Marriage coaching, relationship coaching, though, a whole different beast. I can work with one person to help them change how they are interacting. And when they change how they are interacting, they change the process of the system. So in marriage therapy, I need the system in my office. In marriage coaching, I can coach one part of the system to make changes that affect the whole system. And that does a couple of things. First of all, it gets us away from having someone who feels like they have been forced to be in therapy. And that is a problem for therapy. That is one of the reasons that therapy has so much ineffectiveness to it. Because if somebody doesn't want to be there, they are sure to try to convince the people of why they don't want to be there. And they convince themselves of that further. We have very clear psychological evidence that when people say something repeatedly that they think they believe, they come to believe it more strongly. That's been used in brainwashing techniques, but it's also been used just in motivation techniques of how do you get somebody to do something? Get them to convince themselves of how strongly they believe that. So if you have a spouse who doesn't want to be in therapy and you drag them there, they're likely to sabotage the process just in their attempt to stay true with what they think they believe. So
Yeah.
that's part of the ineffectiveness. But I can work with, if I see it as a system, and if I see it as a system, I realize that changes on one part of the system affects the other part of the system. An analogy that helps people is I see it as a dance. You're in a dance together. So one of the things I often have people say to me is, oh, well, it takes two to tango. And that's them trying to tell me that if both people aren't working on this together, they can't accomplish anything. And my response is, you're already tangoing. You chose to start tangoing a long time ago, and you committed to the tango when you got married. Now we're looking at the fact that the tango's not going well. But guess what? You can change your steps. And if you change your steps in a dance, the other person is likely to change. You can't guarantee it, but at least you're being responsible with the part that you can control, your steps. And they can decide whether they're going to follow the lead or not.
Yeah, that gives me a whole different perspective because when you look at basic systems theory, if you're working on not, you're just working on trying to change the system. And so if one person in the system says, I need to change the way I relate to everybody else in the system, and they do that from a genuine perspective and a consistent perspective, they're modeling the type of behavior that can be imitated by the system and bring the whole system into a healthier state of homeostasis. So I like that pivot. That gives me some food for thought.
Yeah. So that was one of the reasons I left therapy. There were a couple of others, but that was a big one. Another one was that I felt like someone who's working with marriages should be able to stand and say, I
Yep.
am for your marriage. Marriage therapists have been trained to be neutral. Well, therapists, period, have been trained to be neutral. And so my analogy is I walk into my doctor's office and my hand's hanging at some weird angle, and the doctor looks at it and goes, yeah, it's broken. I mean, did you want to do something about that, or do you just want to leave it? I want them to be going, let's fix that. Let's get that back to where it needs to be. And so when you walk into a marriage therapist's office, it's generally because you want to work on the marriage. Let's just assume that we're going to be on the side of the relationship, which, by the way, is the client in that. And that's another mistake that's made. It's often people who are doing marriage therapy don't have a systems approach, and they think they have two clients in their office. They actually have one. It's the relationship. Another reason I left. And so we're addressing the system, and I want to be on the side of that system until we have at least demonstrated that we're at the end of that. We've done what we can. And at that point, it's easy for people to say, I've done what I'm willing to do. I feel good about that, and I can leave without regret. And so my measurement points, maximally, I want to get people to a place where they have the loving relationship they both want, they both protect, they both are connected with. Minimally, I want the person who's taking effort to be able to say, okay, I did what I could. I can leave this feeling good about it. That's the range, and it's, we're trying to go to the upper part of that, of building strong relationships.
Yeah, it makes sense. And systems theory is applicable in just so many situations, whether it's doing family counseling, family therapy, or just any type of situation. And we take a look at the system that the individual or the family or the couple is a part of and just say, okay, how are all these pieces interacting? What can we do to help individuals make positive, proactive changes to make the system come into alignment for the goals that they visualize for themselves in the future and
Yeah.
together. So
We're all interlinked. I mean,
Yep.
that's one of the things that I realized years ago when I was first introduced to systems theory is we're just immersed in systems. My
Yep.
body is a system. Every organ in my body is a system. Every part of my body is a system, all trying to work together for a healthy place. I live in a system of relationships. I live in a system, the environmental world around me. My house is a system. I go around. We're all enmeshed in systems. We can't avoid that. But many times we're so stuck with the individual that we forget to remember the system. And so this brings us back to that. I am a part of the system of this marriage. How can I be responsible for my part of that dance? And how do I want to change that?
Yeah. And whatever other external influences, whether they're work, whether it's environmental influences, anything outside of the marriage, how is that impacting that? How can we learn together to control for those influences so that we can function as a healthy couple and as a connecting couple?
Yeah.
I like that. So, all right, a couple of things. I'm going to ask you, this is a totally unrelated question, but I've been asking this to my guest. So I'm going to ask you this one. I want you to give me your ideally of what the absolute perfect day for you would be like.
I think I come close now. I play a little pickleball. My dog and I go for a walk. My wife and I have some time for meals and conversation, and I get to help people. I had a conversation this past week, and I was talking to somebody who was like, what's the retirement plan? I'm like, what do you mean? I'm doing what I want to be doing. This is my thing. This is my mission. Years ago, I had an illness, and the doctors, they were right with their diagnosis, not so much their prognosis.
Yep.
And they didn't think I would survive it. I did, but I kind of count this as bonus time. And I just became more driven to, this is my thing, to try to leave the world a better place. And however I do that, leaving the world a better place is my goal. So I can't imagine not doing that. I enjoy activities and I do them. So this morning I played pickleball. Before that, we went for a walk. I did some meetings this morning, a little coaching this morning. I had lunch with my wife. My daughter is coming over for dinner tonight. I'll watch a movie together. I have conversations with my son, and I've been spending this afternoon doing work on helping people. That's a good day.
You love what you're doing. It isn't work.
No.
Yeah, and I retired, from the addictions field, and I loved the addictions field. I didn't care for the bureaucracy. I got a little tired of that. And I was ready to retire 5 years before I actually retired because I could kind of see the handwriting on the wall. But I mean, I loved working with the individuals who requested services. I love working with the staff. I love doing what I'm doing now. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm never going to retire until the good Lord retires me.
That's the retirement.
Yeah, that's my permanent retirement. So anyway, I mean, Lee, you've left us with so many good things. You certainly have given me food for thought in terms of how I rethink the whole marriage counseling paradigm and the traditional approaches that have been used. So I want to thank you for that. I also want to ask you if you have one ultimate takeaway or teaching that you want to leave our audience with today. What would that be?
One is disconnection is the enemy of your relationship. And the other is to have that team approach. If you have those two pieces, just those two pieces, you can go a long way. That forms the foundation for what I believe. You work on connection and you see yourself as a team.
That sounds like very sage advice. My last question for you. People want to get in touch with you, contract for your services, purchase your books, follow your podcast. What's the best way for them to do that?
So let's say that they are struggling with that team thing and the connection thing, right? That would be where I come in. I often think about marriage as like you two got on a boat, right? You're now off together on the boat. You think you're on a nice little sail down the river. And then suddenly you become aware that you're hearing the waterfall out in the distance. And there are two different points to that, which are two different places to contact me. The one is you realize that you are drifting down and you're chronically disconnected. That's where the Unpause app comes in. That's at unpauseyourmarriage.com. That's the app. But a lot of people find themselves maybe further downstream, a little closer than they want to be to that waterfall. They don't want to go over that. And so they're at a crisis point, like their spouse is saying separation or divorce, or I'm done with this. And that's a much deeper crisis than the unpausing. That's where you find me at savethemarriage.com. So if your marriage is chronically disconnected and you've got some room to maneuver, that's unpauseyourmarriage.com. If you find yourself at the lip of that waterfall, though, and you don't want to go over, that's at savethemarriage.com.
I'll make sure all of your contact information gets in the episode notes before we go live. Lee, thank you so much today for just a wonderful conversation. I truly enjoyed it and hope we can do it again sometime in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dave.
My pleasure. And with that, that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.